What's up, moviegoers and true believers? Welcome to another episode of Real Comics Podcast. I'm your host for our podcast, VooDoo57, and with me as always is my good friend SpeedyG33. SpeedyG, what's up?
Good evening, all. Civil War.
That's right. This episode is titled Civil War versus Civil War. Tonight we're going to discuss a little bit the differences between the volume set of comics that are Civil War and what we expect to probably see from what we see from the trailers and stuff like that, where the MCU movie version is going. So that you have a really, because they are so very different, we thought that we would do a show kind of as a pre-teaser to next week's premiere of the movie itself. But, as we always do, we're going to start off with a little bit of news. Speedy G, what do you got on the news feed from the interwebs this evening?
I guess the biggest news we've had this week was the X-Men trailer, the third and final trailer.
Should we say spoiler warning here real quick, just in case for anybody who hasn't seen it?
Yeah, I guess we could say, but come on. You're on YouTube, you should be watching the trailer instead of us.
Yeah, you should definitely be checking out the trailer, but go ahead.
I think it was done really well. It re-emphasized again. I feel like Jennifer Lawrence is mailing it in. I think she's done. I mean, we've heard the rumors that she really didn't want to come back. And what's kind of sad is it seems like they've done this in a way to make her the focal point. So you'd think she would be happy with that, but it doesn't seem like that's enough, that she doesn't want any part of it. And Mystique has never been the leader of the X-Men. She's never taken this role. So to do that for her, you think she'd at least oblige and give us a good heartfelt performance. And granted, I know it's just the trailers, but man, she had a lot of lines in this last one and they were flat.
Yeah, they did. No, they did look kind of stale. I don't know what to tell you as far as that goes, but I have to admit, of all the trailers that were shown so far, at least up to this point, this one that has piqued my interest a bit more, especially with the reveal at the very end of this trailer. And I was actually kind of surprised, and you and I had a big discussion on it, and that is, at the very end, after they promote the movie, as they do, there's always a little 2-3 second, I would say 5-second clip of a little extra footage, and the little extra footage happens to be a hand with adamantium claws. So, of course, that is to be Wolverine, we're all assuming. So that was kind of a surprise. But talk about the discussion we had about that particular scene.
Well, what we had that day is the scene was cool, and that's a different discussion. I'll get in that in a minute. But I feel like they didn't have to give us that. I wish they wouldn't have. I feel like maybe Fox is feeling a little bit of the pressure, knowing that Batman and Superman didn't meet expectations. They're following Civil War that looks like it's going to be a huge monster. And they're like, well, we really got to get our movie out there. And not only do we got to get our movie out there, we need to get our heavy hitter out there.
Right.
And so they really went out of their way to let the fans know, because they showed a lot. They extended a lot of those scenes where before, a lot of those scenes, you didn't really know what they were. But the way they extended them, you know what they are. Like right. Apocalypse beating the crap out of Professor X and taking him, in essence. You couldn't get that from the first versions of the trailer, and now the story's laid out for you. They're going to take him, Mystique's going to take over, and they're going to have to beat him. That's basically the story.
Cut and dried, right? Cut and dried with a little help from probably our favorite X-Men at this point, at least. His movies haven't always been the greatest, but he's definitely been top notch, one of the better characters of this franchise as far as movies go.
He's the flagship guy, and I think they did it better than the Avengers did Spider-Man, if you ask me. And it just goes to show how iconic Wolverine is. They gave you a hand with claws.
Right.
I think maybe the Avengers should have learned a little of that, and they should have just given us a web. Maybe a web grabbing that shield and not actually exposing Spider-Man to us yet.
See, there's where I could agree with you, but I was kind of like you, I have to admit, when I saw it, I was like, hey, that's awesome. And then I went, well, that could have been cool if I would have seen it in the theater. Mm-hmm. And not in the trailer itself.
Yeah.
So very cool.
It looks good. Like I said, maybe it increased my interest a little bit, but my interest was high enough already to where I'm going to see this opening day. And I've expressed it on other podcasts. I'm not a big fan of the way Singer does the X-Men, so I do go in always kind of like, but I'm trying to take a glass half full versus, half empty attitude with it, and we'll see where it goes.
Right. Gotcha. Very good. Anything else on the Twitter sphere on your end?
The Inhumans kind of being shelved. That's probably the other big story, and all the talk around that.
How disappointed are you about that? I mean, are you really disappointed, or do you? Because to
No.
me, it kind of makes sense, and we'll get into that. But what are your initial thoughts?
I don't know if it makes sense, but it was always going to be a stretch in my mind. They're not what you would call a well-known property. Okay, you really have to get into some serious comic book readers. Anyone that says they're a huge Inhumans fan, they must be hardcore comic book readers. They are a little more difficult to try and portray, I guess, in a live action. And when you have their main guy, Black Bolt being the main leader of the Inhumans, he doesn't talk. He can't speak because his voice literally will shatter and explode everything.
Right.
So how are you going to portray that anyway? And everyone's thought was that the Inhumans were going to be Marvel's version of mutants because they can't have mutants. So they were going to create an Inhuman to kind of fill that void. And I think they've maybe learned they don't need that. And I also believe that they're getting something back. I just don't know what.
Right.
They're possibly getting the Fantastic Four back, or maybe they are going to make a deal with Fox and get an X-Men back. So they don't need the Inhumans. Right.
See, that was kind of the rumor that I was seeing here right off the bat. Am I disappointed? I don't know a lot about them. So, but if it's a kind of a back shelf kind of set of characters and things like that and storyline, I kind of definitely agree with you when it comes to, I can see where it makes sense. Plus, I think Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there is still a following for that. I haven't watched as much as I should have, but maybe that's what's carrying the load and where they're going to take the Inhumans from here. Does that make it a good show? I don't know, but I can see that's where it's probably going to be headed.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of talk that maybe it's because of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., that they don't want to work with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't think it's that petty. At least I hope it's not that petty, but
right.
I don't know.
Gotcha. Well, cool. All right, next topic. On my end, today I posted it on our feed, and that is the first trailer for The Killing Joke came out today. Rated R. The little teaser trailer. The Killing Joke is a Joker versus Batman story, and I'm really excited. Now I know you and I have discussed, maybe seeing some other ones prior to me seeing this one, but this one's really got my interest peaked for an animated cartoon from DC. What are your thoughts?
I haven't seen it. We talked about that. I didn't see it, but yeah. I'm a big fan of the DC animated universe. I've told you that. I might even say they're better than their movies at this point. They do some really good things in there. They get some of the best actors to do the voice work.
Right.
They're so well drawn, and they tell some really grown-up stories. These aren't for kids. So yeah, I don't see the. I mean, you've got Mark Hamill.
Mark Hamill as the Joker. What's the name the guy does Batman? Is it I want to say Conway.
I can't say his name. I apologize. And then you have the original Harley back. You have some great voice work coming there. So,
yeah,
I like it. It should be
very, very excited. Got it. Cool. Well, I'm not sure that I can think of another thing. It's been kind of a slow start to the week as far as news goes. There was one other thing I wanted to bring up. It's been posted everywhere. I'll give you a quick bit of Star Wars news. It's a quick Vine posted by Daisy Ridley and the Shaolin master who's teaching her swordplay, where she's actually whipping around. I believe it looks like a wooden version of a lightsaber. And while her skills look very rough, you can see where we're headed with this thing, and I'm quite excited to see where we go from there. What do you think? Did you get to see this?
I saw just kind of briefly. Someone had it on Twitter. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I got to think like it. I mean, we saw Olivia Munn doing this earlier in the year too.
Very true. I wonder it's why they put that out.
So I guess I was kind of like, okay, seen that before. I guess so. Yeah. Cool. I guess
All right. Very good. I think that's probably going to take care of it for the news end of our podcast here, real quick. I know you are working away on getting that bar back
I'm
up there. If
trying to
you're
get my
watching us
bar back
live,
on, folks.
Speedy G has lost his bar, but he hasn't lost his wit, so he can still talk. All right, folks, let me give you a quick breakdown of what we're headed towards this evening. We are going to do our best to discuss the differences between the comic book version of Civil War, which is very extensive. Speedy G has read read all these comics, or should I say, I've learned a new term when it comes to comics, and that is the word event. And the difference between that and the movie that's about to be released next week, I believe, and in which case we see something completely different than what I understand that we are getting in these comics. So first, let's start off with this, Speedy G. Can you tell me the basic difference between the comics and the movie? We'll start with just the basics, and then we'll get into the comics and their version.
Okay. Well, the big thing is I kind of want to go over that whole thing about you were talking about an event.
Right, there you go.
I think people might understand what a crossover is. If you've seen Flash and Arrow, you know a crossover. Like Arrow shows up on Flash, but to see the end of what happened, you have to tune in the next day and watch Flash on Arrow. Okay. In comics, they do these crossovers for multiple reasons. To help a struggling title, they'll send a popular hero over to a title that maybe isn't doing so well to kind of boost its sales and stuff.
Right.
So that's a normal crossover involves usually two comics. When you get an event, it tends to be multiple comics, and it involves a large part of the universe, and it has repercussions that continue far into the future of how these stories are written. Some examples of events would be that we're going to get pretty soon into Age of Apocalypse, for example, that's coming up. That was a major event, but it only dealt with mutants. So all the mutant comic books told this story pretty much, and it didn't affect, per se, the rest of the thing. And Infinity Wars was an event, and it involved multiple comics. So now we get to Civil War, and the reason I say that is Civil War involved all of them. If there was a title being drawn or written at that time, we're talking 2006 or 2007, Civil War was portrayed in their comic. So you have this story through the eyes of pretty much anyone you can think of that is involved. And then it continues. It has repercussions as it continues through that entire year. Like I said, 2006 to 2007. So when you put that into context and you realize, okay, this is all the mutants. This is the Avengers. This is the Fantastic Four. This is the street guys, the vigilante guys. These are the villains. These are some of the young teams like the Runaways and the Young Avengers. That's impossible to put on the screen. And the analogy I gave you is to do that justice, to truly do that story justice, it'd be like the three special editions, 4-hour Lord of the Rings movies. And like any good Lord of the Rings fan can tell you, they still left a bunch of shit out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the level of information we're talking about.
It would be, clearly it's something that would be impossible to put on film. Or should I say, not impossible, but you and I probably wouldn't survive the lifetime of all the movies that it would take necessary to make all these, because as I understand it, each comic is seen through the eyes of a specific character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you asked me, and I may I'm not going to do it, but you asked me about my favorites, and it's hard to pick my favorites. I can tell you the ones I don't like, but there's a lot of different stories in the sense, we're not going to go into Fantastic Four, really, for example, because, Marvel doesn't have Fantastic Four, and we're not going to see Fantastic Four in this movie. But the story of the Fantastic Four and what Civil War does to them is a really great story. Because the Fantastic Four is a family. That's how they're always sold, as a family. And this war tears them apart. It tears the entire team up. It splits the family apart. 2 members are one member's for registration. 2 are not for registration. And the thing, Ben Grimm just doesn't know what to do, and he just has to bail. He just kills it because he says it really well. He says, I think this rule is crap. I think this is a horrible law, but I am a patriot and I am not going to fight my country. And everybody wants me to pick a side, and I don't want to. So I'm going to France. He literally says, I'm going to France. I'm out of here until I can figure out what I want to do.
That's pretty deep. Hey, real quickly, since you touched on it, let's talk about registration. Okay, let's talk about what it means in these books to be registered as a mutant/hero.
Okay, that's where it gets, again, much deeper, because in comics we have secret identities.
Right.
The way the Marvel movie universe has been created so far, there is no secret identities. No one has a secret identity as of yet. Now, whether Spider-Man has one or Black Panther has one in this movie, we'll see. We don't know that yet. We're going to assume that Spider-Man does, but we don't know that. So this story isn't about secret identities as much as it is in the comic books. In the comic books, they want to register them. They want to know who they are. They want to know where they live. And they want to control them.
Right.
And it's a really, okay, these were written in 2006. So we're talking, how many years is that? 4 years after 9/11? Okay, that had a huge impact on this storyline. What was going on in the real world, if you read these comics, it really gets into the questions of personal liberty, privacy rights, the Second Amendment. Is it worth giving up our freedoms to feel safer? All these things, that were going on in our life, they kind of tell this story through heroes. The heroes are like, okay, so you're going to regulate us, you're going to control us, you're going to make us government employees, and you're going to decide who we can fight. Also that you can feel safer, kind of. And then, Captain America really kind of takes it to a point of like, it's like a gun right. Like, you guys, it's a knee-jerk reaction. You guys want to regulate guns. And that old saying, if you regulate guns, then the only people that have guns are criminals. Because criminals don't care and break the law. Same process. The criminals aren't going to register. So the criminals are going to still be out there doing whatever the hell they want.
Right.
And the heroes are going to be handcuffed by these crazy rules that are being put in place. So that's another part. So it's a real political struggle. We're not going to get that in the comics. In the movie. The movie's going to be a little more about the government wanting to control things.
Right.
But not to the level that this is. This is a much deeper level. And I think the public couldn't handle a movie like that, to be honest.
Yeah. The comic books seem to me, from what I've gathered from you, where I've gleaned my information, on another level. It's like beyond the average comic book reader. Do you understand what I'm trying to convey here? It's touching on politics.
Yep.
It's touching on family relationships. It's touching on brutalization. It's touching every emotion you possibly can, and from an expanse. How many books, I believe, you think does this cover? What are we talking about? Actual comic books.
It's over 100.
That's what I thought.
100. Now, there's a lot of side stuff that you can cut to the side that you really don't need to read, that is truly, truly icy. And then there's the major ones that you kind of do need to read, or you feel like you got left out of the plot. Like something that's really side is, I think, She-Hulk has a couple of comics that are so interesting. Deadpool and Cable have a couple of comics.
Hey, real quick, before I let you get further, didn't you tell me there were a couple of situations where at least Deadpool was possibly hired to go and take out other heroes as a mercenary? That sounds like fun. That sounds like it'd be a good read.
The government hires him and even gives him a badge so that he can go hunt down heroes that haven't registered. And what he doesn't realize is that Cable's working with the Resistance. And so the last comic of that, I think there's 3 comics in that one, it's them having a real philosophical debate as they're beating the shit out of each other on why they should, be one side or the other.
Gotcha.
And of course, Deadpool, he's really funny in it. It has some great stuff, especially the first one. I'd say the first of the 3 is the fun. But that's not something that you have to read. Like, if you wanted to know the Civil War story, that's not like you want to read the Spider-Man. You want to read the Fantastic Four. You want to read Black Panther. And of course, the major 2. You want to read anything that has to do with Iron Man and Captain America, because those are the big ones. The other stuff is fun, and it does have a little bit of an impact, but you can get away with not reading it. Right. Punisher, for example, you can get away with that.
Would you say that that kind of like the movie? Are Iron Man and Captain America the leaders of these two sides in the
Yes.
storyline?
Yes.
Okay.
Iron Man's an asshole. Iron Man, there's no way you can read this series and empathize with Iron Man. He just, like, here's one major difference from the movies. In the movies, the teams are kind of divided up nice, so that we
Right.
have two nice teams so they can fight. We're going to get this great fight on the screen, which is great. That's what we want to see. We want to see heroes fight. If you break down Tony's team, he don't have shit. He really doesn't. He has some geniuses. He has Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards, and he has Hank Pym, and they're very smart. But as for like someone who can really throw some hooks with him, he really only has Miss Marvel and She-Hulk. He doesn't have a strong team. Anyone who's badass is with Captain America. So
Right.
Tony actually, he gets this dumbass idea to recruit villains. They put a chip in villains so they can semi-control them, but they can't completely. So he unleashes like Bullseye and Green Goblin and all these like bad dudes on the heroes.
Wow.
And he makes a deal with Kingpin even to try to track down Captain America. So he totally gets desperate and does some really shady shit.
Well, this is stuff we're clearly not going to get in the movie.
No, because they don't want Robert. Just like Hugh Jackman, we talked about being the franchise
Right.
over there next week. Robert Downey Jr. is the franchise, and you don't want to sully him to that level. But yeah, like there's no way Black Panthers isn't any part of Tony's team.
Right.
Him and Tony have a bunch of fights. He has nothing to do with Tony. Spider-Man foolishly sides with Tony at the beginning and has a real come to Jesus moment and gets the hell out of there.
Right, but if on the Spider-Man, I was going to lead into that. On the Spider-Man side of it, as far as he is in the comic version of Civil War, didn't you say Tony twists him a little?
A lot, not a little.
Uses him like a puppet, pretty much.
Pretty much uses him like a puppet and gets him to reveal his secret identity in front of the world, which eventually endangers Aunt May and Mary Jane. Yeah, I don't want to give away stuff to people that haven't read it, but bad things happen based on this. And when Peter realizes that he's on the wrong side, and that's pretty much he's getting to that point. Things keep happening, and the final straw is there's a battle and a hero's killed because of Tony and Reed's incompetence.
Right.
And that's when Spider-Man says, I'm out of here. And him getting out of here, basically Tony's 6 villains on him. And these villains nearly kill him, and the Punisher's the one that saves him. Or Spider-Man would have died.
Right.
He'd have been done. But that's to the level that Tony just, he's a horrible person, and we're not going to get that. We're going to get more of a, it's like a weekend at the X-Men, school is what we're going to get. A bunch of guys are going to throw down and beat the shit out of each other, and then they're going to move on. That's kind of what we're going to get out of it.
Yeah, we all know, at least when it comes to the movies, that the big payoff is going to be the Infinity Wars. And this may not be it, but I am excited. What else did you want to discuss when it comes to these comics as opposed to the movie itself?
We can just get into things like we could just discuss, like when we talk about a certain character, like, Black Panther, how different he's going to be. I mean, we don't know exactly Black Panther's story.
Right.
But my guess from the little bits I put together is that he has his own agenda.
Right.
Okay. So even though he's with Tony, he's not necessarily with Tony. So that's going to be interesting, and I'm really interested to see what that happens. Where in the comics, he kind of has his own agenda, but he's very secure that he doesn't agree with anything that Tony's doing. And
Right.
he's firmly either he was going to stay out of it or he was going to get with Cap. But there was no way he was going to be part of Tony's. You know what I mean? And then one big thing missing from the Black Panther story is there's no Storm. Because Storm and Black Panther had gotten married right at the beginning of a Civil War, how it's happening, that's when they get married. And so that's like a big deal because they've just become the power couple of comics, of heroes. Think about that. You have this mutant that's been the leader of the X-Men. You have another guy who's a king and one of the most brilliant heroes there is. And all of a sudden now they're a team. The biggest team that you can have. They've got each other's back, and people are freaking out on that.
Right.
So,
From a movie standpoint, it looks like the way they're going to portray Black Panther, it will be interesting to see how they get together. Clearly, I'm not spoiling anything here. It's in the trailers. If you look at it, it looks like he's simply attending a function that maybe he either takes a loss or there's something that happens where he finds himself having to get involved, and through whatever reason that remains to be seen yet, he does side with Iron Man's team. So I'm really interested in that. Yeah, he's not there. He doesn't have a side. He doesn't have a stake in this race until something happens. And I believe that's where Crossbones comes into play.
I think so. I mean, I have three theories. You know, some people have seen this movie are going to laugh at me because they already know they're not it. But it's either, like you said, Crossbones, or it's the Winter Soldier, or it's the Scarlet Witch. It's Wanda. And one of them caused something. They caused some kind of death and destruction, and that was kind of the final straw of like, okay, you heroes are just killing things because you're out of control. And whatever that happened affected Black Panther personally. To cause him to be personally involved in this. And it's going to be at the hands of one of those three, you know. And Captain America is going to just be caught in the middle because he's choosing to defend what he's choosing to defend.
Interesting. So. Okay, well, you've talked a little bit about Tony being very different, Tony Stark and Iron Man being very different in the comics and the movies. How is Captain America very different between the comics and the movies?
You know what? I don't think he is very different. I think we are going to get a Captain America very similar. Now, the only thing is Captain is a bit stubborn in the comics. And as it keeps getting worse and worse, he refuses to bend.
Right.
And it's told as a story of like, you know, he's a patriot and he's not going to, you know, even if everyone else thinks this law is a good idea, he knows the law is wrong. And therefore, because it's wrong, he's going to fight it till the bitter end. And he has that epiphany at the very end where he realizes, I can't be doing this. This is a bad thing. But I think we're going to get that guy. It's amazing. If you're a Cap fan, Civil War is kind of cool because all these heroes from all over the place have these moments with him throughout the series where they're like, oh my God, it's Captain America. Oh my God. I mean, just the like, he's the badass. They all bow down to this badass because he's like everything. He embodies everything that all the heroes want to be, which again it doesn't help the whole Tony story because then it makes you even hate Tony more. Like, this guy's so badass and he's so good and he has such great principles and you're being a weasel over here. You know? And you're just an ex-drunk playboy and so
playboy, millionaire, philanthropist. Yeah, I got it. You know, I have to say though, on my end, I think you're right. I would agree that I think he's still stubborn. Let's look back real quickly at that Age of Ultron moment, even in the two movies prior to, which we're going to talk in detail probably next week about. But when he realizes how much the government's involved through S.H.I.E.L.D., he's already stubborn. He doesn't like it. He calls him out. He calls it how he sees it. I think you're right. I think we're going to get a taste of that to finish off.
And you know, it's funny that you say that. That's a good thing you brought that up real fast. His story in Civil War is very similar to what happens in Winter Soldier with S.H.I.E.L.D. Basically, Maria Hill is also very different in comics.
Right, I was going to
say. She's kind of nice, you know.
You stole my thunder. I was going to go there next.
She's a very, nice character that comes from a funny sitcom, and she's really nice. She's not like that in the comics. She's like a very aggressive, mean, my way or the highway, make an example out of all these damn costume assholes person. So she basically tells Cap right at the beginning, so are you with us or not? And he's all, I don't know. I want to, Cap just wants to think about it.
Right.
And she basically does what they do in Winter Soldier. She fucking has the agents try to capture him and take him down right there. And so he has to fight out of the helicarrier, similar to him having to fight out of the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters.
The S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters building.
So it's the same kind of storyline that they've already borrowed. So they're not going to do that, obviously, because I think it's already been done. I mean, you might get it on a smaller level, but we've already kind of seen that S.H.I.E.L.D. turned on him. It was different in Winter Soldier. It was Hydra doing it, but that's kind of what happens to him in the comics.
Yeah, in the movies, this is how I see it. Clearly, we still have that general who's now in a higher position. So now it's not Shield doing it; it's actually the government doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think that's gonna.
Well, that's in there too in the comics,
right.
Right.
So definitely,
they just want to weaponize like some minor characters that we're not going to see on the thing. The government really does some nasty things to them. And I'll give you a quick example because it's kind of in the news. We forgot about it.
Okay.
Nathan Fillion.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Okay, we should have talked about that in the news thing.
Simon Williams, Power Man. Okay, Power Man in this thing, he's kind of a movie star. He's told this Fillion's perfectly cast for him.
Oh,
so he's
wow.
a movie star, kind of hero show-off guy. Basically, Shield says, you're going to help us catch these guys. Because he's registered. He's with the registered thing. Because anyway, he's well-known. And he goes, no. And he goes, well, we've seen this. We pulled up your tax records, and you haven't paid tax on this and that. So either we're going to arrest you, or you're going to help us. So he doesn't want to do it, but he has to do it, and he has to go hunt down and work for the government. And they pull lots of little tricks like that. And that is part of Cap and Luke Cage. Another one's argument is that these guys are going to tell me what I have to do. Now I'm working for them. Right. And that guy that you're talking about, going back to movies, go back and see the Hulk. And the crazy things that he did to catch the Hulk. He was willing to inject that other crazy asshole with a serum so he could turn into Abomination to go chase the Hulk down. So that's the kind of guy that's going to be in charge. And he has his own agenda, and it's about using heroes as weapons.
Right.
And Tony is so stubborn that he doesn't see it. Or he sees it and doesn't care. That's a better way to say it. He sees it, at least in the comics, he sees it and doesn't care.
That's interesting because I could, when you were just hitting those notes right there about not caring, it sounds like, or at least, again, only what we glean from the trailers that are out there, that it's not that he's wholeheartedly with this. There's some scenes in there where just maybe he's questioning it, but he still feels like it's the right thing to do. Would you disagree with that at all? I mean, that's kind of how I see him, because there's a few moments where he's like, I don't know if doing this is the right way to do it, but I think it's the best way to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a little bit. He calls himself a term, and I can't remember what he says of when he describes his way of thinking. And he sees things into the future and where he thinks things are going. And his thought process, especially early on in the comic before he's kind of gone off the rails, is that, we're going to be regulated anyway, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. So let's participate so that we can kind of control what's going to happen. You understand what I mean? Versus just fighting it the whole way, and then when they finally put it on us, it's going to be something worse than if we would have been involved.
Right.
Because he says it's going to happen, and it's just a matter of time before something bad happens, and then something bad thing does happen. Those stupid, the young, what's it called? The young team. Why can't I remember their name right now? Excuse me. They'll come to me in a minute. But those dummies, blow up a school, and the school gets blown up, and they kill over 600 people because they're in an inexperienced team fighting a villain that's kind of whacked, and he blows up the school and kills 600 people, and that's it. The public is like we have nowadays. It's a knee-jerk reaction. There's a shooting somewhere, and we're gonna outlaw all guns. People just kind of don't. They think on emotion in that moment, and that's basically what's happening with these heroes.
Right. That was a good way to put it, because we do want to be careful. We don't side either way when we're doing our podcast here when it comes to heroes, villains, and or guns.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I'm just using it as
you're right.
Kind of what it's based on, and the guys who wrote this. If you read these books, there's no way you can read them and not realize that they were going off of things that were going on. And again, we're talking a few years after 9/11, and that really impacted. We're going through that. How we were losing some of our liberties for safety and different things that were going on in the world.
Right.
The comics were impacted by it.
We still have those longer lines at the checkout.
Oh yeah. There's something
alert warnings
that are very relevant that are going on. If you read the comics, I mean, it's a bit more complex for me to just be spitting out little things, and everybody's going to get their own interpretation based on their own political and philosophical, beliefs, what they get out of the comic. But it's there for you if you want to look at it, and how you interpret it is up to you.
Well, like I said, I'm really glad we're doing it. I really wanted to do this episode. even though, this is a very special kind of episode of Real Comics Podcast with a lot of talking by Speedy G, because Speedy G's got the knowledge. What can I say? He's the bookworm when it comes to these books. And there is a vast difference between these two things, but I can't say that it doesn't still make me excited for the film, having not read the comics, because they may be taking it from a different perspective, and it seems much more condensed, and that may almost be a good thing. What do you think? Do you think that the film won't just be good, but could transcend the comics to even separate themselves, like where you could go, the movie was awesome, and the comic books were just as awesome? It didn't fail one or the other.
If you're willing to go in with the approach that it's not going to be the comic books, I think I think the movie's going to be fine. And one good thing happened with this. This movie was announced a long time ago. There was
exactly.
Okay, so first it went for Civil War. Then it went from a realization, as I talked to other people, you know what? We're not going to get Civil War.
There's no way.
There's no way. And then you're kind of like a little grumpy for a little bit. And then you kind of go, well, but we're going to get something cool. And we're going to finally get Black Panther. And he's probably going to hook with Captain America. That's going to be awesome. Ooh, and Spider-Man now we find out he's getting. And so you kind of start taking the positives. And we're going to have, Ant-Man's joined this now. Awesome. And so you kind of have to let that go. And like I said, it's a very huge, long, complex story. They probably couldn't tell. That would have to be their end game if they told that story.
Right.
And it still would be hard to tell. And just let it go and let this be a good movie of what it is, if you accept it. Now, there's little things that may make me take it from an A to a B. Like if I feel that too much of the story is about Bucky, then I'm going to be like, eh.
I think it might. I hate to say it. I think it might.
I know, but I don't want it to be a lot. I want there still to be a little bit of that conflict, that there really is this philosophical difference. And we've seen it in the trailer, but I don't want it to disappear between what Tony believes and what Cap believes. And we really do have that kind of debate where you walk out of the movie and you think a little bit like, wow, who was really right? I do want that. So, yeah, I think it's going to be great. There's little things I'll be watching just from a personal standpoint, because Spider-Man's my favorite character, and I'm a huge Panther fan. I wouldn't say he's my favorite, but I love him. And they're both being introduced. And how they're introduced is going to be very, very important to me. This is the groundwork for their standalone movies. For Black Panther, finally a standalone movie.
Right.
For Spider-Man, this may be the last incarnation of Peter Parker, to be honest. I really believe that after this run, they are going to go with Miles Morales. So this they may go with one of the female Spider-Girls.
Right.
So this will be the last time. So I really want them to get Parker right.
I think they will. But you know what? This is the one thing that Disney and Marvel have done well. And this was my one big knock on the DC stuff. They've introduced the characters in their world, for better or for worse, in the right fashion. They set us all up to fall in love with Tony Stark, as Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, Chris Evans as Captain America, Hemsworth as Thor. I think they've done a really good job of it, and I don't see them faltering with the Black Panther character and with Spider-Man. I think we're headed to good things.
Yeah, I hope so. Spider-Man, like I said, I'm undecided on us telling his story as a kid one more time. And by making him a kid, we could lose out on some really cool stories in the future.
It just depends on where this, and we talked about this before when we spoke of not the trailer, because there isn't one, when we spoke of the picture that was released with the title announcement of the film called Homecoming. And I said at the time, I said, my hope would almost be that Homecoming meant he was coming home from whatever he's doing here in Civil War. Mm-hmm. And whether better or worse, when he arrives, people may know or not know who he is still, and that's his homecoming. He's dealing with this. Now he's home and he's got to deal with whatever he left behind. And I actually I'm curious to see how they're going to do that. I don't think we're going to get the Ben story and all that other stuff. So
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
If we're going to have him as a kid, I want some of those things that were great about him being a kid, like him totally making these mistakes. He makes a lot of mistakes, and then, he still has to somehow pass his classes. He still has to juggle his girlfriend. He has to do all those things. And I worry, like, okay, so right away he's with the Avengers. Now, Spidey did not join the Avengers until he was a full-grown man. He was never part of the Avengers as a young man. So the fact that he's under Tony's wing, does it accelerate him and he becomes a badass a little sooner than I want? I want him to be a clumsy screw-up.
Right.
I want him to be he's funny, he has a heart of gold, he does his best to win, but he's going to make some mistakes. I want that part. That is part of the charm of Spider-Man, that he's learning on his own because he really doesn't have anyone else to teach him. If he doesn't, I mean, it's a long time before he trusts. You know, he's much older by the time he starts trusting other heroes and involving them in his life. You know, Daredevil's involved in his life at a hardcore level, but they kind of grew together. And the way they've done it in this universe, Daredevil's a man already. So that's kind of a unfortunate. I wish that they weren't that way, but
right.
It is what it is.
I agree. I totally agree. Now, let's talk real quick about the movie itself. We're going to veer a little bit away from the comics a bit. We've talked a little bit about where this plot might go as far as Black Panther. Obviously, we see them kind of fighting each other, but I think you and I have discussed this a little bit, and we've talked about, as far as the movie goes, how it'll be different from the comics, is that this will just be a moment in the movie that may only happen a little bit.
It'll be Act 1 and Act 2.
Exactly. It won't finish this way. This will not be the end. So what do you think that we have to look forward to after Act 2?
The villain, I would think. But then on the other hand, we are talking about a Marvel movie. And if there's one knock I can have on a Marvel movie, other than Loki, they've had shitty villains. So
right.
The villain might get buried again. And maybe we do have the battle in Act 3. And maybe the villain is just kind of like window dressing, and there isn't much to the villain. And it is going to be all Civil War. So, I mean, that I really don't know. I don't know what to expect.
I'm hoping. I have a little hope here. I have a little prediction, a little thought. You know, we haven't seen much of this. Is it Baron? I mean, I'm getting this right. Baron von Zemo, right? I think he might play a bigger part. They might be holding him back. We haven't seen him in any part of this, none whatsoever. And so I understand. I know he's not the badass, but he's the person that may be behind some of these things. I mean, I'm not quite sure how to take this person. I know nothing about this character.
Well, he's in Civil War, but he's in Civil War in a way that I know is not going to happen. It's a book called Thunderbolts, and he has a team, and they're villains. They're trying to make good. I'm not even going to get into it, right, because that's not going to happen. So I'm thinking he's just kind of he's kind of replacing the Red Skull's kind of agenda. The Red Skull has an agenda in this comic book, or in this event, that possibly that's what Zemo's doing. And I'm just going to leave it at that because it could be a spoiler for other people. It could be a major spoiler. So I'm just going to leave it there. But he could, in other words, he could be the puppet master behind all this. That's a positive way of thinking it. This is the one area where I think Marvel has really dropped the ball, and it has been their villains. And that's across the board, with the exception of Loki. I don't think they've had a good villain yet.
Well, I think we're headed towards one.
I still am not even sure Thanos is going to be good. I know you think you are, but you know what? They botched Rowan. If you ask me, it's the one thing that brings Guardians of the Galaxy from like the ultimate great movie to me is the way they handled Rowan. He just wasn't done well. And then, and Ultron kind of ended up coming off a little on the weak sauce side. Yeah, they haven't really got it right. Red Skull was kind of an afterthought in the first Captain America.
You know, I liked him a lot in that movie. I liked it a lot, and it's a shame that he was gone so quickly.
Yeah. Now, Winter Soldier's great, but the villain is not really a villain. It's Winter Soldier. He's kind of that anti-hero. He's gonna become a good guy. And then Robert Redford did a good job of kind of manipulating it, but he's not your traditional comic book villain per se.
Exactly, I agree. Totally agree. Cool. Well, what other thoughts do you think you might have, or are we wrapping up here soon?
I don't know if there's just some other things. I mean, I think I hit. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of things.
We could probably go on and on and on. It's so broad. But I didn't want to get too carried away into the other two movies. only because I know we do want to talk about those next week.
Mm-hmm.
We do want to talk about Captain America, the First Avenger, and we do want to talk about Captain America, the Winter Soldier, prior to getting into our review later
And possibly
that week.
the Iron Man movies, because
And the Iron Man movies.
I think how Tony's gonna behave in this movie has been spelled out for you in the other 3 Iron Man movies. It's
Right.
there, and the
Gotcha.
Avenger movie, definitely.
Cool. Well, we hope you've gotten something from this. That the book series, The Event, is what I should be calling it, correct? The Event is so extensive. It's almost, we could probably talk for another hour on certain characters and their adventures through getting through Civil War. What
Read the
characters?
Spider-Man one. It's awesome.
The Spider-Man one, top on the list, huh?
That's my favorite, without a doubt. And continue after Civil War and see what he does to Kingpin. He lays the best beatdown I've ever seen in comics on Kingpin. He beats the living shit out of him. You know, it's great.
That is awesome. All right, well, I guess we're going to wrap this up right about here. We hope you've enjoyed the information on Civil War versus Civil War right here at the Real Comics Podcast. We will have, like I said, just the backstory reviews and also what's new in comic books and comic book movies next Wednesday at about the same time, 9:30 Mountain Standard Time. That's Zona time for you folks out there. So join us then. But for tonight, we're going to say goodnight for now. SpeedyG33, say goodnight.
Be careful. Avoid the spoilers, my fellow geeks.
That's right.
1 week. You can do it.
Stay away from the trailers, avoid the spoilers, and join us next week. We haven't discussed it yet. I know that Speedy G and I were talking about possibly, since Wednesday kind of falls too soon for us to review Civil War, we may throw in an early podcast. I'm not quite sure if we get to do that or not, but we'll keep you informed. As always, I want to say goodnight. Thank you all for joining us. And as always, be your own hero. Good night.
Good night.